to this computer. There we are. So we've missed the introduction that I did and the acknowledgement and the first few slides of revision, but we've only just now started with Hala, and the recording has just started. So anyone who's missed the session and watching the recording, you've only just missed me talking for 10 minutes, but you haven't missed anything from Hala. So how are you, Hala? Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. As I mentioned, I'm here on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm on Dharawal country, which happens to be what the colonial settlers called Botany Bay.
Right.
So I find it hilarious that life has landed me on Botany Bay on a street named after Joseph Banks and in the seat of Cook. So as an anti-racism, one of the things I do is anti-racism work. I feel like I do need to send Mr. Morrison, who's now my minister representative, an email to say, would you like to have a meeting with me and have a talk about race and gender? Wouldn't that be? I don't know if it'd be great. It might actually not be, but
maybe you can just give them a piece of your mind at least.
Yeah, absolutely. But the irony of life, and anyone who does know me, people who do know me do laugh quite out loud when they find out where I now live.
You've settled, yeah, because you're not originally, you haven't been there for very long. Where were you before that?
Originally, it was in Wurundjeri land in Naarm in Melbourne. So that's where I grew up. And I feel like I have lived there. I actually feel like I live in two cities. Actually, I do spend a lot of time down there and up here, and heading over to the Tiwi Islands next month, which I'm very excited about, to do some work with the local community there. So that'll be exciting. It's obviously a privilege to get around the lands, and it just makes me, actually this morning I was having a meeting with, I was chatting with the person, my contact up in NT, and we were just talking about just how diverse this country is, like just the two of us trying to align our work and what's going to happen and our focus, and realizing that, so much of it comes from what we're exposed to in our everyday life. And for me, it's Melbourne and Sydney largely. And for him, it's central Queensland and the Tiwi Islands and Darwin, and just how different those worlds are. And you're on the other side now, out west, which
at the moment
is a whole other planet.
Yeah, totally. And then generally across the ditch and in Palawa country, Lutruwita, it's such a massive country and so many diverse experiences of patriarchy and systemic racism and colonization. It's like it's really a great way to be able to actually enter the conversation, this idea of varied experiences of various systems of equity and inequity and oppression and whatnot. So tell us how your work at whichever one you want to start with, Global Echo or the Institute of Nonviolence, whichever one you want to start with, tell us how you go about addressing these issues through your organizations that you've started.
I feel like, that's a relevant sort of preamble to the story of Hala. Where do I begin? Yeah. It's just, so I guess I'll go with the one I launched first, which is Global Echo Consultants. And I pretty much started working as a diversity and inclusion consultant from 2004, and initially supporting the work of Myriad Consultants. Many people do know Maria Demopoulos, who's the lead consultant there. And so I spent a lot of time working with Maria's probably the reason I do D&I work. And she's not the only reason, but she played a big role in me doing it professionally. But my early childhood experiences, having migrated here at the age of 9, and having experienced most forms of racial violence, I would say also drove my interest in doing this work. I studied psychology and social work and was working with initially the Arabic speaking community, and then all migrant and refugee, like recent newly arrived from non-English speaking backgrounds, communities, and as well as working in the male prison system. So I've always had two hats on. I do feel split between the two. So it's kind of relevant that I run two businesses. One is has that social science, that community and social systems focus of equity, inclusion, diversity, and justice, and in whatever order you want to say them. We can't have one without the other. So that's what it's really about. And that's what Global Echo is about. And it's moved much more into a very far away from cultural competency training. I would pretty much refuse to do that and feel a bit I don't know what the word is, disheartened, let's say, that even still exists anywhere. Because I know that as a young 23-year-old doing cultural competency training for Victoria Police and Australian Federal Police, when I was, early days, was quite damaging for me, I think. It's just reinforcing racism pretty much.
Yeah, and for the whole ecosystem, right? Like I remember doing the same things. I was doing what they requested at the time, which was cross-cultural communication training in my 20s as well, for emergency services, managers and police force managers and people in the health sector. And it was really this like a pathologizing, kind of externalizing kind of like approach to like tell us about how we can include those ethnics into the services.
Explain the ethnics. Absolutely. And for me, eventually it was all ethnics, because non-Anglo Australians pretty much. But initially it was Arab Australians, which was so like, that's who I am. And it was like standing in a room for 3 years, explaining to people who I am, what my culture is, and just not relating to any of it. So that's where I started, and where I've come is doing a lot of more focus on anti-racism, systemic responses through Global Echo, and having had a clinical side of my brain or whatever all this time. So I started out doing drug and alcohol clinical work at Port Phillip Prison from 2004 onwards, and did some work in problematic gambling as well, and also bringing together working with a pilot project that was designed on engaging Arabic, Chinese and Vietnamese communities with the hope to then broaden that out across the state of Victoria. So that was like both clinical and other. And as you can imagine, in all those experiences I had, family violence was always coming up. When I didn't know, when I kind of knew, when I wasn't trained to deal with it, but dealing with it with men who use violence, who experienced it as children, migrant communities and their experiences, and the complexities there around visa and extended family violence and all of those things that we still haven't figured out, which for reasons we can talk about today. So basically in 2020, and I'm happy, and I think this will come back into the conversation, but in 2020, I launched the Institute of Nonviolence, which has a core focus on intersectional feminist framework, applying an intersectional feminist framework to family violence response, whether that's early prevention, late crisis intervention levels. And I have, worked in men's behavior change spaces and other behavior change spaces in the LGBTI, so all gender groups, for both survivors and people who wanted to change their behavior in relationship. And so, and I work with migrant refugee communities still. So it's directly applying that intersectional approach and working with the mainstream to improve their ability to do so. So they're my two worlds that I balance, that are actually so interlinked, because social forms of violence, whether it's racism or gender-based violence or family violence or workplace microaggressions and bullying, that I think a lot of people on this call probably have experienced based on the stats you said from last week. They all come back to a very common point, which I think you've been discussing for a few weeks.
Right. Yeah. Power dynamics, and when that becomes violence as well, because it's like you said, it comes in all forms. It's it's in the family, it's in the workplace, it's in the school, it's in the media. So it's definitely quite a pervasive kind of issue. So I think you've named it well. The Institute on Violence covers so many different areas and spheres that we all function within. So it's really excited to be working with you. And as some of you on the call might know, Hala spoke at last New Kind conference at RMIT, and since then we've partnered with Hala's organizations to actually host one of the sections in the conference this year. So you'll actually be able to see Hala put together an entire panel talking about some of these issues at New Kind later this year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. This is a bit of a preview, I guess.
Yeah.
And I love that we're having this conversation, Erfan. Like, I think we've both chatted, we've been chatting for such a long time, and I definitely feel you're a kindred brother you know, from a universal mother.
Yeah.
And I love, you know, sharing our parallel experiences that sometimes are the same and sometimes are different.
Yeah.
And what I really value is when I can speak to male colleagues, and I got the experience of that doing men's behavior change work, you know, just watching men reflect on their position in society and what they're experiencing in groups, and the struggle for them being a facilitator in a space with 14 men who use violence against women.
Yes.
Because, you know, obviously being the only woman in the room is extremely complex, and we talk about that. But I've been able to gain insights into the male experience when you're a man and you want to challenge the systems and you want to challenge the gender role. So any one of us wanting to challenge rigid constructs around race roles or gender roles, which are completely made up, and I know you've been talking about this over the weeks, what we experience, and that experience in itself is different, whether you identify as a man, a woman, trans, or non-binary, you know, and we, you know, the layers just keep getting more difficult, I'd say, the further away you are from the white, hetero, fully able male norm.
Yeah, totally. So that brings us to the theme of intersectionality, I guess, which I'm assuming most people in the call have heard, if not everybody has heard. Some people have a very solid idea of what it means. Some might not. But before we go into hearing from Kimberly Crenshaw, who you've lined up a video clip for us to watch. Let's hear it from you. Like, what's your take on it? How do you kind of like use it and apply it in your work? And then we'll go to the actual theorists who coined the term first, and hear from Kimberly in a minute. So what are your thoughts on how do you see it and apply it in your work?
That's such a massive question.
I know.
You know, so I guess
we'll do it all very quickly. So.
Yeah, wow, it's already 8 o'clock. So I guess you know, I have since 2020, since launching the Institute, reflected so much on my journey. And if forgive me for indulging a little bit, you know, everyone, to talk about that. But I shared a bit about how I felt being a young person led by adults in my own community, and they, you know, sort of like, this is what you do cultural competency training, this is how we do it, and how damaging I found that. And just really glad that our, you know, sort of we've moved away from that as a society. Also just, you know, experiencing being in a prison system fresh to the sector of AOD work and anything, and being given the responsibility to run the Koori drug edit programs, the Indo-Chinese drug edit programs, working with pretty much every Arabic male speaking male prisoner, and then the general stuff that I was doing that my colleagues did, and how enriching that was for me. And sometimes I just think my colleague, I was the only non-Anglo person in the team. And I just think like they missed out on so much learning, you know, and I guess anything I say today is a result of racism, systemic racism that I've experienced. Everything that I'm doing in my career now is a result of systemic racism, because I refuse to be quiet, because I refuse to use any privilege I have to just get along, earn my salary, not advocate, not stand up for what I believe in. I've pretty much been bullied out of every workplace. But before I get bullied out, I get given the too hard basket, which I've never found too hard, you know, so because it isn't, you know, nothing's too hard if you do it all the time. So I want to thank racism for giving me the skills I have and the insights I have and the exposure I've had to so many different groups of people, and my willingness now and readiness and desire to want to be with anybody who's considered too complex and too hard, because they genuinely are not. They're not. They're, you know, and I can just see people as human, you know, and it doesn't mean I don't see their color, and it doesn't mean I don't see their gender diversity and their sexual orientation. Or I love it. I see it. I love it. I'm challenged by it. Sometimes I'm triggered, and I think those triggers are great because I've learned to embrace being uncomfortable and learning. What I haven't learned to embrace is being the victim of racism myself. Like I'm bitter about that.
Well, it's right to be as well. I think I definitely resonate with you on that. I think definitely on both those points. I owe everything that I do now and the consulting that I do and the training I do to the experiences of systemic, overt, and subtle racism that I experienced working in settlement, migration, youth engagement work, all that sort of stuff, working in, event management and cultural festival kind of design. And definitely now, after, 15 years of doing that, in the last 5 years, I can actually, advise organizations, left, right, and center to do this work. And I definitely also share that, how did you coin it? You haven't learned to accept racism.
Embrace, yeah, I'm not embracing racism.
Like that's completely unacceptable to me as well. So I think what you mentioned earlier really hit a note with me. Some people do manage to find a way to exist and survive in a system that's inequitable inherently, and they find a safe space, and they have the full right to do so, to exist within a political system or exist within an organization without rubbing too many people up the wrong way. I think we've all done it, at some point in our lives. I've done it in some way, where I've curbed my enthusiasm or chosen my words very carefully, but I think I still definitely share that same healthy dislike of systemic inequality with you. Which is why we, work together and bump into each other and find ourselves in the same circles, I guess.
I think I've followed your work for years and just knew when I first saw you on Facebook advertising New Kind Festival. I think it was 2016. I was like, this is my type of person. Like, this is a kindred soul. I really wanted to volunteer with you at the time, but couldn't fit it in. And I just kept an eye on you, and I just knew we were going to work together one day. So here we are.
Here we are.
To bring it to intersectionality, I remember I just want to say this because I think we all do this. I hope people can relate to this. In whatever you're doing in your life and you get exposed, you have different ways of thinking about stuff. Because I remember the first time I heard the word intersectionality, I was like, oh, they've given it a name now. And it was stuff, which is great that they have. And I full respect to Kimberly Crenshaw, and I'm about to talk about her and show her a video. Like, I total have a shrine for Kimberly Crenshaw somewhere in my heart. But I just want to allude to the fact that we make our own observations, and so when we connect with a topic, when we connect with a theory, when we connect with an approach, it's probably we've made our own observations. And I know that I think I was 25. And by the time I was 25, I'd spoken at a number of national, international, and local conferences. And I had a routine. And I was also speaking to ministers in government a lot because I was working in not-for-profit and we needed to get money basically for programs. And there was, anyway, I had a routine. I had, I can't wear them anymore, but I had 10-centimeter heels. I'd straighten my hair. My hair was longer, I was 25. I couldn't do anything about my age. I couldn't do anything about my gender, but I could straighten my hair. I could try to grow as tall as possible without falling over and being on stilts and looking ridiculous. And there was something else. Oh no, my race. Yeah, sorry, my ethnicity. So I did think about dyeing my hair blonde and changing my name to Rachel for a long time as a kid, but I never did that.
Many of us have thought that. Not Rachel, but I had other Anglo.
You could be Michael and Sam, isn't that
I was in my primary years. I remember I was in primary school when I was aware of the detriment that my name was, in a racist society. I was trying to convince my parents as a 10-year-old that I need to change my name from Erfan to something more Anglo. Because even then we were aware of how it holds you back. Anyway, tell us about the routine you had before you even engaged with white men in power.
My relationship, this is my relationship with intersectionality, I was observing stuff around me, and I'll talk about that in a second, but I remember being 25 and I started to actively and regularly say to people, I've got 5 things going against me. I'm young, I'm Lebanese, I've got Arabic, my name sounds Muslim. It doesn't matter whether I am or I'm not. September 11 happened when I was 21. So I'm tiny, I'm short, I've got curly hair, and I'm connecting to audio somehow when I've touched nothing. I also have a split personality that jumps into Zoom phone calls and just, it's gone. I just shamed her publicly and she just disappeared. So I'm little, curly hair, female, Arabic.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the last, anyway, that was 5, my age at the time, which is no longer a factor for me, thankfully. I can get rid of things. And I was noticing in my experience, I was noticing what I had to do to be taken seriously. And I was noticing that there's only so much I could do. And there was a point where I won't be taken seriously. Yeah. There was a point that I was invited into spaces because of those things, so people can go, oh, how amazing.
Yeah, the diverse perspective.
Yeah, and every time I spoke, I was amazing. And I didn't think I was amazing because I was in the room with people much older than me, way more qualified, way more experienced. I was blown away by their words, but no one said to them they were amazing.
It's that condescension, isn't it? It's that
that's right.
Patronizing, like, oh, you're really well spoken kind of vibe. It's like they don't say it to the next person, but because they weren't expecting it from you, they feel the need to tell you how great you were. Oh, you've done so well. You're amazing.
Yeah.
I find that.
Can you imagine if, you know, the Prime Minister spoke in Parliament and people were, oh, that's amazing. That was really great.
Or any person, like any white male staffer even, right? Like you go up to them like, oh, that was amazing. I think I might start doing that. Just to try it out. And just look at the faces.
Yeah. So I had my own experience, and I was starting to talk about these different experiences, and I was starting to notice my clients that I was working with, where they were in a community, newly arrived, what was going on for them, and definitely noticing it in the prison system. Like I was just by 3 years in, I wanted to shut all prisons down, to be honest. Like I was just like, this is not actually the response. This isn't a justice response. This is an oppressive response. This is about locking up certain people. It's about reinforcing certain stereotypes. It's about it's stunting growth. If our intention is rehabilitation, with I think there's a genuine intention, but not a genuine effort to ensure it's being carried out. If we have a genuine intention to carry out rehab, we wouldn't put most people who are in jail, we wouldn't put them in jail, we'd put them in rehab centers for all sorts of things.
And preventative systems and measures and education programs, all sorts of other things that would fit within a systems change kind of approach, rather than constantly criminalizing, incarcerating, you know, people as at the end of the game, rather than going back up the stream, rather to you know, to address the issues. And I think you're definitely right in that the way it's currently functioning is not to create a safer society. It's to criminalize and marginalize and exclude certain persons from their full go in society.
Yeah.
And it's always been like that, right? Like it's historically, it's been, it's had that kind of foundation to it. If you think about
its foundation is punitive. And then we lumped on, there's 5 pillars of justice. I mean, this is a whole other webinar. There's 5 pillars of justice, and this punitive is one of them. You know, and we do have Curry Court in Victoria. We do have restorative justice and other things that have come on board even beyond that, those 5 pillars. But what the driver of our systems is a punitive driver. And so as long as it's the same as colonial ideology driving a lot of the systems, and we can't undo racism if we don't address that. And we're going to watch a video later where there's a beautiful comment about truth telling. So let's get to the videos. This one is a 1-minute summary, and I will send the link to you later if people are interested. It's from a half-hour speech of Women of the World Conference in 2016. Kimberly Crenshaw was giving a keynote address. I have fought with bosses and government representatives about this because I just think, look, I'll leave it to the audience to decide. I find it's really simple, and I find it's the way it's explained, and I find it's really important that we understand what Kimberly Crenshaw wanted us to know about intersectionality. And just before we play it, Kimberly Crenshaw is a professor of law in the United States. She coined the term to be used in legal matters. A case of employment where positive discrimination meant Black men got jobs, gender positive discrimination meant white women got jobs, and Black women didn't get jobs under either of those legislations. So that's how it came into the world in the late 80s. In the very late 80s, in 2022, Kimberly Crenshaw is still jumping on into, you just go YouTube, Kimberly Crenshaw videos, and you will see that she's today still trying to explain to the world what she meant by intersectionality. This is an academic professor who coined the term within academic frameworks. I would like everyone to write in the chat the name of any other academic they're aware of that whose theory we question and misconstrue so much as we do intersectionality. So here
that's the perfect example of it, like where Black women just aren't given the respect and regard that they deserve, just like every other person as an equal, right? If a white person or a person of a male person of color was to create a theory like that, it wouldn't be so misconstrued, misinterpreted, twisted and turned in and on itself. So yeah, I totally agree that still to this day, you can watch videos of last week, last month, and last year where Kimberly's still trying to explain, this is what I meant by it. So yeah, let's watch the video and then we can unpack that a little bit.
All right, it's literally a minute and then we can have a chat.
Yeah.
I'll just make sure that you can all, that I'm sharing my sound. Okay, here we go.
A lot of people, particularly those who haven't followed demarginalizing from its initial iteration, often mistakenly think that intersectionality is only about multiple identities. I've got 3, you've got 6, the identity question goes on and on. Some colleagues in Germany undertook to count how many intersections there are. Last count, there were like 17 or something. It was an attempt to map them all. That's not, at least my articulation of intersectionality. Intersectionality is not primarily about identity. It's about how structures make certain identities the consequence of and the vehicle for vulnerability. So if you want to know how many intersections matter, you've got to look at the context. What's happening? What kind of discrimination is going on? What are the policies? What are the institutional structures that play a role in contributing to the exclusion of some people and not others?
We are.
Oh, sorry.
All right, that's the next video already.
Yeah. Okay. I'm really curious. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, go. You're curious what?
Oh, there's just, for me in 1 minute, there's so much in that. I'm curious to hear from the audience, but I mean, please, Erfan, if you have a comment to make.
Sure, yeah. It's so succinct, right? In a minute. And she, I can't imagine how many times she has had to repeat that same thing over and over and over again. She talks about how it's not about multiple identities, though there are different, identities that lead to vulnerability or become vehicles. She says a vehicle for vulnerability, but she says it's really about the structures that make certain identities a vehicle for vulnerability. So it's not about being able to say, I've got 3 layers or 6 layers or 17 layers of intersectionality that I could be potentially oppressed against. It's really, because that is kind of fracturing, and it's like saying I'm different and I'm special and whatnot. It's about looking at the structure that makes that vulnerability, that identity rather, a vulnerability. Because you have every right to be diverse in all of your identities and have those layers, but it's the structure that makes that identity a vulnerability that we need to address. So let's look at that, because that's the one that makes everyone oppressed along those lines of identity.
I'm not, yes, I'll type the full name. And actually, I don't know if people got my email earlier. I'll do that. And I do just encourage you to just put this name in YouTube and just watch all the videos. Like I did a while back. I just spent hours watching it. And so I know you do some polling, Erfan. I'm actually curious to know, and whether we can do this quickly or not, but just how many people use intersectionality in that way, in the way we just heard on the video, in their workplaces.
I would love to have been able to do that, but with Zoom, I think you've got to create the polls beforehand.
That's okay.
Launch it, but like we can hear in the chat.
We can get it in the chat.
Yeah. If you want to ask your question of the chat, there you go. Turkan already says I do. Rachel says no. What was your question again for others who missed it?
How many of you are using intersectionality that way? And it might be that you personally want to, but your entire workplace is understanding intersectionality in that context. Crossroad. Someone's written her use of crossroad is overused.
Anna says I do.
There's a bit of a mix.
Not as yet. Rachel says no. Turkan says I do. Someone says there's a disconnect between theory and practice. We do try. Elga says intersectionality intersects with system thinking. Renee Hall says I'm a student. I get tired.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to a student the other day who was sharing with me how much she's had to argue with the lecturer about the correct use of the term intersectionality, because it was being taught in the course, but it was being taught. You know, it's so quick for us to sort of put up a slide or whatever of the problematic groups, you know, the complex groups, the too hard basket. And talk about intersectionality from the perspective of, if you're this or that, you're going to struggle, you're going to have barriers to access. My preference is to put up a slide of the systems and structures and show the points of exclusion to certain groups. What is it about those systems and structures and the way they're designed that ends up excluding some people or oppressing some people or disadvantaging, underprivileging them?
There's a thing there, isn't it? Because we kind of, I said that in different words earlier with regard to the cross-cultural, you know, cultural awareness kind of training. Even that approach has got a bit of the same kind of sentiment to it, which is how do we mitigate the vulnerability of this individual group and that group without considering the actual system that causes that identity to be a vulnerability. I think cultural awareness training oftentimes is the same thing as like our health or education or justice systems have inherent issues, but instead of addressing them, let's look at how we can help this group assimilate, integrate, or get better outcomes out of that system that's already inherently unjust. It's a bit of a parallel going on there. And I think Anna was agreeing with you in that Anna's getting tired of having to explain it over and over again, and mentions getting a backlash
from white feminists. I saw that and I thought it was a great segue to our other videos. Working with for a religious employer is complicated. Yes and no. Like, I don't think religious institutions are an interesting one. Having worked in family violence, and I also did a bit of consulting work for a period of time around child sexual abuse in systemic, like in organizations. So with Childwise, which is now part of Save the Children. So the whole accreditation process around that, and interesting how many of our clients were religious institutions. I mean, like not-for-profit organizations as well, not just like direct, so church run, but not the church. And it fascinates me, since we are talking about systems and structures, how much the system is designed to not hold religious institutions to account in the same way because of the sanctity of religion. And I don't want to disrespect the sanctity of religion or spirituality, because I personally also abide by that. I think it's quite beautiful. But hiding behind sanctity to perpetrate violence towards anybody and to uphold misogynistic views and to uphold the patriarchy, white supremacy in some cases, and child sexual abuse is not okay. That's not sanctified. And it diminishes, more than anything else in life, diminishes from the sanctity of religion. So we do need our systems to be able to respond to that. And it is sensitive just because it is, but sensitivity is not a reason not to do something when violence.
That thing, right? That's the thing existing within that structure is what's damaging, not trying to address it, not trying to talk about it and, you know, remove sexism, racism, child sexual abuse. Like, talking about that is not sacrilegious. It's allowing it to exist within the system that is really sacrilegious.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. You know, sort of, I guess, an example of how embedded and entrenched it can be, and you know, the tricky part, like the too hard basket, is unraveling racism and misogyny and the patriarchy. That's the too hard basket, is dealing with superiority complexes out there. So I think what I've pulled together for everyone tonight is, altogether it's 4.5 minutes. What time do we finish?
It's usually scheduled for 1 hour and 15. So we've got until our time difference is putting me out of whack here. So your time, we have until 8. 8:45.
Yeah. Okay.
So we've got time.
Okay, great. Because altogether it's 4.5 minutes, but it's sort of broken up into intervals. And what I would like to do is play a bit have a bit of a chat, play the next bit, have a chat, and then play the last bit. And then I guess just sort of leave time for everyone to ask questions and do whatever.
Just to keep it brief, because we could talk for 20 minutes just on the cultural appropriation thing. Do you want to skip that first minute and go to the second snippet of that video?
What I can do, because it's only about a minute, I can play, because
Play it.
Probably trying to find it is going to take longer than I'll just play it.
Yeah.
I mean, the other option is to play the 4.5 minutes. I don't know if that's too long.
No, just play the first 2 snippets in a row.
Okay, sure. All right. Let me share again and oops.
We are reminding people that the history of publishing is white people telling stories about everybody. That is what publishing was for so long. And it was white authors saying that they were the most authoritative and the most able to write about everybody's culture. And I think that this response now is saying, you know what, people are smart enough to write about themselves, that we trust people to write their own narratives and their own stories, and that we want to empower people to write not only understanding identity as an intellectual exercise, like I'm intellectually sort of inhabiting this other experience, but like I know it because I lived it, right? I think that that is like where this thrust comes from. And I do think that there's a difference between appropriation and appreciation. That appropriation is about exploitation. It is about centering your own experience as you inhabit another body or another life. Appreciation is saying, hey, I'm learning in this moment too. I'm like growing and I'm pushing myself as I explore something else, right? And what Toni says too in other writings is she's like black people are the best people to write about white people because we had to survive all of them, right? That like that is what Toni is like, we had to raise your kids, we farmed, we like built the country, we did all of it. So we are more able to write about all of you because we had to survive, right? Like that is sort of Toni's experience too. And I think that there is something to that again, that like they're writers who can inhabit other lives as an intellectual experience, but at a point, I don't want you to write about a gay black man as an intellectual experience. I want to hear somebody who lived it write this story. And this isn't to say that other people cannot, but it is about acknowledging that legacy, that it is only white authors who feel the authority to write about everybody else's culture as if they are the voice.
We could have a whole hour-long conversation on that.
Just that last statement says so much. I think we played the video without introducing it, like giving the background context. We get so excited that, you know, I get excited and I forget these things. So some people on this call might have seen that. It was a Q&A episode last year, I think, and it was writers. So most people on the episode are writers, and it's not the whole episode. I do encourage you to watch the whole thing. Why we're showing this is these snippets from that episode really speak to the intersections of gender and race, and particularly the last bit we're about to see. This first bit was more about race, and it was DeRay talking about the ownership of the stories from white writers. So Lionel, I forget her last name, I'm terrible with names, probably selective memory loss. We're about to see Lionel. She's a white female writer in the US. She always writes Black characters into her books, often female Black characters, and often writes them in positions of slavery or disadvantage. And her argument for that is that that's the role they play in life, and she's doing that. So she was being questioned and she was publicly under attack for doing that, and whether she should or shouldn't continue to do that. And that's part of that conversation that's happening there. And so I'm just keeping an eye on the chat as well. Yeah. Did you have any comments, Erfan?
No, I think I'm keen to watch the next bit. I think that was a great intro you gave in like a prelude into the conversation that's about to play out. But I want everyone to be really focused on the words that are being shared now, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 people who speak in a kind of bit of a circle. So just pay attention to the content, the subtext, how it plays out, and then we're going to unpack it after we've watched it.
Great.
So
one of the sort of the big eye openers for me in the research that I did in this book is, I think, a big massive part of the reason why white women are still not believed when they talk about their experiences of sexual assault and of violence at the hands, particularly at the hands of white men, is that throughout history, white women, cellular history, where white women have been regarded as a protected class to be protected only from men of colour, only from the sexual deviancy of black men. And then when settlers came, brown men.
I was going to say, I am hoping that it is not your purpose to set, in the modern day, white women against minority women and in a contest of who's been more oppressed. Or that's one of my main problems with this way of thinking, the identity politics thing, is that kind of rivalry, which I don't think
didn't create the
in
rivalry,
which anybody
Lionel.
wins.
No, this is very important, and I know I'm sorry to take up other people's time, but I can't let that stand. If there's a rivalry, if there's a division in feminism, if there's a division in our society, it's not caused by people of colour, because we're talking about our repression, because we're talking about our experiences of racism.
I'm not saying that
and it's not
that minority women are causing it, but it's a way of thinking, and I don't find it very productive.
It's based on history, and it's based on our experiences.
Okay, I'm going to stop you just there for that point. DeRay, listening to this, what do you think? I mean, is there a sense in which white women in the United States have been let off the hook when it comes to the long history of racism?
So I think I hear this idea of nobody wins when we play the oppression Olympics, right? Like, that is just not a winning game.
Yeah.
I will say that there is something, particularly around whiteness, that we just aren't honest. That, like, the history of whiteness is a history of exploitation and domination. And I'm like, I didn't invent that. I'm not like the first person to say that. But when we think about white women specifically, you think about the new research that's come out about white female slave owners, right? That, like, there is this narrative that white women on plantations were just these passive bystanders while the men were inflicting all this damage. And the new research actually suggests that white women explicitly participated every facet of the institution of slavery, that they were like intimately involved in the persecution of people. They were intimately involved in the perpetuation and the defense of the institution. So there is something about naming the history. And it is this idea of not letting people off the hook in the way we tell the historical record. And when we talk about Trump, I mean, let's be clear, 53% of white women voted for him. And that is not something that we ignore, right? That happened. And there's something about being honest. When we talk about truth and reconciliation, we are reminded that the truth has to come before the reconciliation. And there are a lot of people that want to do all this reconciliation work without dealing with the truth first.
Thank you. The chat's going to be flooded in a minute as soon as we start asking for thoughts. But yeah, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on that chat, on that conversation. A whole bunch of things happened that like I just wanted to jump in. I wanted to pause at like 3 or 4 different points in that. But you start, Hala. You go first, because you found this video.
Look, you can, I'll just, so the entire episode you can watch on ABC iView. You can look back through all of their episodes. So I think just do a search for Ruby Hamad, Lionel Shriver, DeRay, Benjamin Law, episode on writers, and you'll be able to find it literally on the Q&A on iView, on ABC iView.
Yeah, I think someone's
Thank you. Someone's super quick with links. It's great.
Thank
This
you.
is so, I wish every time I deliver training, can I have you all, can I have you all there? I love this. It's so awesome.
Attendees. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. So we pulled, I got my team to pull out just those snippets because they illustrate so powerfully for me the intersections of gender and race in observing Ruby Hamad. And I watched that and, just saw myself in so many different situations in life where I have felt like that, like just looking at her face. I think I've had the same facial expressions. I think I've had the same sort of silencing, not just being silenced by others, but my internal, like, I don't even know what to do anymore. I've tried. So I'm really just like, there's so much in that stands out for me, and I know it did for you as well, Erfan. Is there anything that's sitting with people? I know there's comments coming through, but if we're talking about intersectionality and we're talking about gender and we're talking about race, what is the point in that video that stood out for the audience?
You want to share that, everyone? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the point that stood out to you, because we do save the chats and it does spark some great conversations between us. So Anna says, I would like to hear more.
We would have all liked to hear from Ruby.
Not men talking to men, exactly.
So on that point, Ruby is the only person, and it's a short video, but if you watch the whole thing, I think she apologized for taking up too much space.
And she did it
5 times. She was interrupted at least 5 times by men on that show. Somebody sat there counting it. So there was a whole social media thing around it at the time. I remember the amount of times she was interrupted, the amount of times she apologized for taking up too much space, and she actually spoke the least of everybody on that panel.
Of course. And then there was a bunch of things that happened in a row there. So there was a very, very valid point that Ruby made from the beginning. And for those who don't know, Ruby Ahmad is the author of White Tears, Brown Scars, highly recommended reading. And we are going to have Ruby on the webinar series in a few weeks' time. I've already spoken to her. She's keen to come on and talk. So we are going to have a chat with Ruby. But she made a very valid point that I want to come back to and talk about that. But then the other female panelist, the racism was so strong that there was an immediate defensiveness reaction to that, saying, I'm hoping that you're not trying to set up a rivalry about who's been more oppressed. And that really broke my heart, because the point Ruby was making was not at all about rivalry. And if I would love to go back and just watch that a little bit again, listen to what Ruby actually said before I kind of try and land this point. So
do you want me to do that?
I'd love to, if you can tee that up. Yeah. So there was the defensiveness that came from the woman that kind of overshadowed the point Ruby was trying to make and didn't even allow her to see the truth of Ruby's point. Then there was the sensitivities of the host was like, oh, I better interrupt this conversation before we get to any truly, mind-opening points. And he deflected a conversation about the intersections of gender and race to a man of color, but still a man. So it's like, that was like their kind of defense mechanism. Like, oh, I better not let this one go too far. Let's see what this person has to say. Now, I guess the male panelist, like his name escapes me at the moment. Who was it?
DeRay Mckesson.
Yeah. He didn't support the host, but he didn't explicitly say, hey, Ruby should be the person speaking on this. He, in a way, took up the space and elaborated in a different way what Ruby was trying to say, but he didn't make the point as perfectly as Ruby was making. He actually made white women the enemy in what he was trying to do there. It says white women also participated in slavery, in every element of slavery, et cetera, et cetera. But Ruby's point, if we can go back to it, was much more
and I think just to, as we go back to watch that, I think I found the point really important. Not that we don't create it's not about creating a hierarchy, and now we're doing the same thing that we're answering to Lionel. It's not about creating a hierarchy. It's actually about the reason I feel Ruby needed to answer that and respond to Lionel is because the conversation was between women about women and about how white women and women of color are interacting with each other, a point that DeRay couldn't answer. So he answered beautifully from the perspective of an African-American descent with the history of slavery, which is very relevant, but not the point Ruby was making around violence against women. So I'm going to play it again now.
Thank you.
Absolutely, what he said is super important. It's what Ruby was saying was super important as well. And everything in that conversation needed to be said. And he did need to come in and back Ruby with that statement after Ruby was given a chance to finish what she was saying, which she never was. So I'll just share again and we'll just replay and see if you can spot it.
Ruby finishes speaking.
Yeah, spot what Ruby was saying to Lionel right at the start.
In the research that I did in this book is, I think, a massive part of the reason why white women are still not believed when they talk about their experiences of sexual assault and of violence at the hands, particularly at the hands of white men, is that throughout history, white women, secular history, where white women have been regarded as a protected class to be protected only from men of colour.
That's it. So powerful, that point she was making there. Her priority in that moment was how to help the gender equity movement for white women, in fact. She says, the reason why white women aren't believed when they speak of violence against them from white men, so she's trying to help white women here with this point, is because historically, the patriarchy and the white supremacy has only protected white women from men of color, because their racism was so strong. They're like, the sexual deviant men of color, we need to protect our white women from them. So she says, and that heritage is still existing. So today, because of racism, white women aren't protected as strongly from the violence of white men as they deserve to be, because the system, the society only responds to the violence of persons of color. And it's so true.
And absolutely, and I think the comment before about white feminism, and there was the follow-up about what I meant by the person said what I meant by white feminism, I'm trying to find it, is that it excludes, it's a type of feminism. It's not about white women who are feminists. It's about a type of feminism that doesn't recognize intersectionality and racism. And so here for me is Ruby Hamad building a bridge over to Lionel and saying, let's have a sisterhood here. If we're going to talk about gender-based violence we're experiencing, I'm here watching you not get believed by your own people because of racism. And I want to build a bridge with you, like a solidarity to fight it, to sort of stand for women's experiences of violence by men across the world, regardless of ethnicity and race. And Lionel's response was, I hope you're not creating segregation.
Yes.
So and it's exactly what Ruby was not doing. And what's ironic, if anyone's read Ruby's book, and if you haven't, please do read it, is Ruby's book is exactly about that, is about Lionel's response and how that type of white feminism between women is, how racism is embedded at the heart of it. And so the feminist movement in itself worldwide is now divided by racism. And the division, the creation of race as a construct and the creation of racist structures was done by white people. If anybody, white supremacists, let's say, it wasn't all white people, it was upper class, it was positions of power that created systems that will privilege most white people. Not all white people are benefit. This is another Kimberly Crenshaw thing that's important, if we're doing a whole session on her, not all white people benefit equally from racism. Not all men benefit equally from misogyny or the patriarchy. So it's about looking at the intersections. Class comes in, lots of other things, sexuality, gender identity, all of those things come in as well. But Ruby was building a bridge and was called a segregationist because a white woman can't see racism, can't reflect on it.
No. And it held back the impetus, the movement, the motion Ruby was trying to create towards shedding more light on violence against women. That woman, Lionel, derailed Ruby's point, which was a very valid point that would have actually benefited all women in society, particularly white women, if they were to be believed when they speak up about violence against them by white men. That was Ruby's point. So she was actually trying to help that, the feminist movement. So that Lionel's racism in that instance actually did a disservice to white women, because her racism was so strong, she couldn't put it aside to help further the agenda for gender equality. And that's what's so heartbreaking about it sometimes, racism and cultural superiority, and this inability to want to recognize that, there are some differences that are experienced along the lines of gender and race. And that woman just didn't want to enter that conversation at all, even when it was to her own benefit. It was really heartbreaking to see that happen. And even though, as you said, the point was kind of backed up eventually, but it really was Ruby's point to emphasize and elaborate on. And
well, the point about white women being explicitly involved in racism was backed up.
Yeah.
But that point was missed, and I'm looking at the conversation. It's missed. It's missed. It's easy to miss it. Yeah. It's a fleeting moment, and I guess the more you have these conversations, again, it's that whole thing of like, what we're talking about before. The more you do something, the more obvious it is, and the easier it is, and and actually in the spaces I'm in at the moment with family violence and gender-based violence, and looking at that, I see so many examples of that. And I think that comment earlier about white feminism being the type of feminism that ignores racism was spot on in terms of what's going on there in that dialogue, and where anyone ignoring racist structures, but claiming to be a feminist needs to stop and reflect. And it's that I do love Duray's final point of we can't do reconciliation without truth. The truth has to come first, and that's part of the truth. And it's an intersection of gender and race there.
Absolutely. How's the chat going?
Yeah, it's going okay. I'm watching. I've had it on the whole time because just
were there questions from everyone who's watching that we've kind of missed yet? Sophie, do you want to give us a wrap up? Have there been any questions, or do you want to just type them in? Anyone who's wanting to throw a question at Hala while we have you.
For like another 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, we can go over by 5 minutes. But yeah, I'd love to get at least one question in for Hala. I've got a session to prepare for tomorrow as well. I've got a great group here at Perth Festival that I'm facilitating for tomorrow morning. So I'm keen to get back into that, but I do want to make sure we give space for like at least 1 or 2 questions before we leave tonight's webinar. So while we've got Hala here, I'd love to get a question in. What else before we wrap up? What were some of the other things we're talking about? I mean, we have almost weekly chats and catch-ups about this stuff, and our conversations sometimes go on for an hour and a half. We've got to like rip ourselves off the phone. What are some of the other things that we've chatted about in the last couple of conversations we've had?
I'm like, wow. Well, I think there's some questions coming in, Erfan. So one is, how do you speak with white feminists to encourage them to move towards intersectional feminism? Where would you advise organizations to start on a journey of, okay, and how do you mentally prepare yourself? Okay, I'll do my best. So how do I speak to white feminists? It's ongoing. I incorporate it in a lot of the family violence and gender equity training that I do, where I can be in conversation with let's say a racism denier who identifies as a woman, who has such a deep, in-depth understanding of gender and how gender plays a role, gender drivers of violence, the gendered nature of everything, way more, can talk about it better than I can. And then I will say in that conversation, that's how racism works. I'll sort of try to bring in that link. Okay, so you can unpack those structures of gender. We can unpack that structure around race, and that's how race privilege works. And then I lose them. There's sort of like this blank glare. They lose, or we'll be talking about gender drivers of violence, and then we start talking about working with someone from a non-Anglo background, and they'll say, oh, that's their culture. Their culture condones violence towards women. It's like every culture, most cultures on this planet currently are embedded in patriarchy and condone violence against women. That's a whole complex other conversation. But when someone understands that, what happens when the blinkers come on, and then suddenly it becomes a race thing, an ethnicity or culture or religion.
Can you just say that, what you just said again, please? Because I want everyone to hear that. When you try and say, what about this, this, and this, and they say what? That's what?
That it's culture, race, or religion.
That's their culture? Yeah.
Yeah, that's their culture. Their culture condones.
There is the essence, the core of racism. That's cultural superiority right there. That's white supremacy right there. It's like, oh, we've got an issue to work out here with violence against white women. But as soon as you want to talk about anything else, that's their culture. She's literally saying their culture is inferior to us. So I don't want to engage in that, because what I'm trying to work on at the moment doesn't apply to them. So it's like the racism is so strong that they're actually doing a disservice to the cause of ending violence against women, because they don't even want to talk about that. They'd rather relegate that to like, oh, that's cultural inferiority because that's just the way they are. But we've got to address it, violence against white women, but I'm not worried about violence against any other woman because that's their culture and they're culturally inferior to me. That's how pervasive racism can be, that it can just get thrown into conversations like that without getting called out as a white supremacist.
No, that's right. And I think calling out in that context is probably not useful, but calling in, inviting people to reflect and even just reflecting back what you just heard. Like for me, it sounded like, and sort of reflecting back their level of expertise on talking about gender and just doing a bit of a wondering, just a why. Like I try to stay invitational in those contexts because I know that there's a lot of unconscious blocks driving that person's statement. and in a short period of time, I like, that's best that I can answer it, but it is actually hard work. It is ongoing. You know, it's not like sort of solvable in one conversation. There's a question about how do I get organizations started on their journey. I love that you called it a journey, because that's actually what we do. That's actually what we do in the Institute. We've created a model called the Journey Towards Equity and Inclusion, and we do that for race, for gender, or a combination of, you know, general equity, inclusion, justice, and diversity. And so I like that you're thinking about it as a journey, because it absolutely is. I think that was from Daniel. And I don't want to use it. I don't want to sound like I'm plugging our work or anything, but we definitely, I know I talk to a lot of consultants that agree with me, where they've reached a point where they realize, and they do this in different ways, they realize that the 3-hour training or the 1-hour training, we often get asked to do, oh, can you just come in and talk about racism for an hour and we'll solve our problems? It doesn't work. It is a journey of growth, of learning, of development. The model we have follows a sort of a 4-phase model of building insight, building empathy, creating responsibility, and creating safety. So it sort of falls under that. I know, Erfan, you do similar stuff. I know other colleagues in the space, you know, do a series of workshops, and we try to hope that people will actually invest in the series as opposed to one-off work, which, you know, sadly we sometimes have to do to just hopefully create enough interest and curiosity.
Yeah.
The other thing I would like to encourage everyone who's in an organization wanting to do this work and needing more support, things like the Equal Employment Opportunity Network that's out there. I know there's a few women of color networks. So if there's women out there, there's Culturally Diverse Women is one. There's Winitha Bonney runs a Women of Color network, just to support people just having those conversations in their workplace. So find peer support that's out there. Get in touch with me. I'm always happy to support people and link you in with those places. I think I put my email in. I'm happy for you to send it out later, Erfan, as well. How do I mentally prepare myself? I will not lie to you. I meditate at least 2 or 3 times a day. I listen to calming music all the time. I try to eat healthy food. I talk to people that are like-minded. I remind myself of being invitational and curious. I connect with I do fundamentally believe that we are inherently non-violent. I find that by going inwards, doing mindfulness, meditation, prayer, spirituality, whatever your practice is, yoga, stretching, spending time in nature, I constantly connect myself with that internal calm and peace, because it's very easy to lose it doing this work if I don't. And I use that to try to connect with everybody else's internal calm and peace. I don't know, I don't know if we're gonna have time for all of this.
I think it was a perfect point to wrap it up on, unless there was a burning question, but I will give everyone
I think I have to leave it there. Yeah,
I will give everyone your website details and an email address. We'll do a post session follow-up email, and maybe wrap it up.
Can I say, sorry, like just I'm so happy for everybody to get in touch with me. I'm happy for you to have my email address. I guess I use emails for like work, like structural things. If you're interested in what I talk about and what I do and just sort of want to stay in touch, follow us on social media, like whether you follow me or the Institute of Nonviolence or Global Echo, subscribe to our newsletter via our website. And if I put I'll just put the Institute website up here, and that's got the links on it to all of our socials.
I just email, just asking for random advice or feedback.
Super happy for you to get in touch with me however you like, but I guess I will need to limit, sort of email contact for structured and constructive, Thank you, Ever. I appreciate that being understood.
So I'm going to leave the chat function open for a bit because everyone usually sends in their thank yous. Really appreciate your time, Hala. I'm looking forward to having more conversations, potentially again on this series, but otherwise at the end of this 12-week seminar series, we're definitely going to have more conversations on webinar formats. So thank you so much for being here today and sharing expertise and experience. Thanks everyone for watching and for being here. I'm really excited that you keep coming back week after week after week. We will have some more guest speakers, but Ruby Hamad, not next week, potentially the week after. And we're going to continue going further on this conversation. If you'd like to get in touch with Hala, as she said, email is fine as long as it's work related. Otherwise, the social media links, which we will send everybody after this seminar. Thanks everyone for joining. I'll see you again, same place, same time next week.
Thanks everyone.
Love.
Thanks Erfan for having me on.
Pleasure. Thanks for coming. I'll see you soon. Good night, everyone. Bye.